Looks like I'm wearing lipstick because my lips are so red. And now it's got the gloss from the chapstick. It doesn't matter though. It doesn't matter if I look like I'm wearing makeup. We're gonna nerd out today. Let's fucking go! Welcome back everybody, I'm Carter Sandvin, and this is the channel for Sandbox Illustration. Of course it is. Come on. This is going to be a very exciting video for me today. I am going to be discussing every story that I'm going to be writing for the foreseeable future. These are all of the ideas that I've started developing for either a comic book or the animation project or some other project like that. So I'm just going to go through each individual story and give a general synopsis on what that is, on what the story is about. The first ones I'm going to be doing are the stories that I am for sure writing. A couple of them I'll discuss what's going on there. The ones after that are just all of my raw ideas, and then I'm going to do a quick recap on the animation for you guys. Looking over the stories that I'm writing, the first one is the young Mackies versus whatever was standing in their living room. This one is very cool to me for a couple reasons. It started off actually as kind of a two-part story at first, not intentionally, and it wasn't written to be that way. But originally the Young Mackies was kind of two stories going at once. The first part of the story is all about four siblings. Their names are Huck, Harry, Hope, and Holden. All of them live under their mother, Andrea. Andrea is not a good mother to them, quite abusive to be honest. And one night Andrea comes in and puts down forms to send them to a boarding school so that they will no longer live with them. And the oldest brother, Huck, who's kind of taken on the father figure since their father died at a young age, kind of blows his lid at her and just goes off on her with everything that he feels, calling her a horrible mother. And at the moment, all that they see is her just freaking out, and then it cuts to them and they just have these looks of shock, and the house just starts to glow this bright pink color, and all you see is the kids just shocked at what they're looking at, and an earthquake starts around them. So you don't even really know what's going on there, and Huck just gets everyone in his car and they drive off. Originally, they were going to go to that boarding school, and the story was going to be about them trying to integrate themselves into this boarding school while escaping their previous lives. But I wanted to change it because as I was developing the story, I felt like there was so much potential with the boarding school, and there was so much potential with the mystery of their mom, that I felt like they didn't mesh that well. They were both such big ideas that it kind of took away from the focus of the story. So I removed the boarding school part of the story, and that's actually going to be its own story, which I will discuss coming up. And instead I changed it to where they went to go live with their sister in a small town, and they soon slowly discover everything about who their mom is, what their mom is, and their entire history as a family. Very cool story. I don't even really want to say what it is because that's kind of one of the big reveals of the story, is what they discover themselves to be. The next one that I have is the Ashes of Ember. The Ashes of Ember is going to be my giant fantasy series, my fantasy comic series. I plan on doing multiple iterations of the Ashes of Ember, and it's going to be like an anthology. There's a whole storyline about this world that controls lots of different magic, but the act of cannibalism had a curse on it. There was punishment, magical punishment for acting in cannibalism, and it mutates you into a more heinous form of your own species. And so I kind of had a cool idea for the story where a lot of the typical fantasy races that we see, I would actually connect them. So when you commit cannibalism in this world, humans become zombies or Draugr, elves become vampires, and then I believe it's fairies become pixies, dwarves become trolls, and that one I really like too because dwarves are always depicted as builders and trolls are often depicted as destroyers. Orcs become ogres, different things like that. And it was just going to be this large fantasy world with a magic system that I built. I just wanted to have a story that was just pure classic fantasy, something akin to Skyrim. The only thing with this story is I think I want to change the name. The name does have a lot of meaning behind it, but it's not the most original, so if I can come up with something different, I would really like to. But that is the Ashes of Ember. Our next story is actually kind of another fantasy one. This is Nox. Now, Nox kind of changed itself as I was developing the story, and my concept for it was, hate to say it, I actually based it off of Minecraft. But to give credit where credit is due for a nerdy game like that, I thought it was a really cool concept that nighttime is absolutely off limits. That is where all of the horrors of the world come out. And I thought that was really cool, and I considered the idea that an apocalypse would be built around that. So I created this world where you had walled cities and there was always a curfew. You had to stay within the walls after sunset. But as the story slowly developed itself and I tried to come up with more of the lore and all that, it actually kind of became another fantasy story in a cool way, because it's no longer Earth. Or I might make it Earth. I'll have to look on my notes again. In fact, you know what? I'm going to pull up my notes right now, because originally it was going to be Earth, but I made a completely different planet for it. If I remember correctly, I developed this story a long time ago, like a couple years ago. The reason that I decided to not make it Earth was so that I wouldn't have to go in and explain the lore as to why there were these new creatures. It's not a laziness thing. It's just I really got sick of stories like that to where you had to rewrite Earth's history and explain why now things have changed because of this thing that isn't even really plausible today. But I did make it its own planet. I'm not even sure if I have a name for the planet. The whole story is about a kid named Max Hunt, who has always actually dreamed of going beyond the city walls and seeing what's on the other side, wanting to explore the world. And his parents try to explain to him, like, that's really not a good idea. Things go really bad out there. And the biggest thing about this world, and I think this was one of the reasons that I tied this in, the reason why cities are so adamant on staying within the walls is because cities are so spread out. There aren't really countries in this world. There's just like small villages scattered all throughout the planet, and there's only a small number of them because it's such a rocky planet that soil is extremely rare. In fact, the only places where there is viable soil for growing is where the cities are. Every time that someone finds soil, they build a city around it. And he lives in this city called Pender, which does really good for growing and community and all that. When I say growing, I mean growing like crop. But going back to the story, he goes to the doctor one day and they let him know, like, you have a serious illness. And immediately he's like, his world is just like crumbled on him. And one night while he's staying in the hospital, it's getting close to the date where they said that he could pass away. The doctor just comes in with a very like concerned look on his face, a shameful look, like he doesn't seem proud of himself or happy about the situation, and he just goes, "I'm sorry." And they put Max into a bag, and as soon as sunset hits, they throw him over the wall, and he's stuck out there, and he's just trying to figure out why this happened, you know? Like, was the doctor involved? Was someone else bigger in society involved? Not to even mention the fact that he's gonna have to figure out how to survive beyond the walls. Being outside the walls during the day is one thing, but being out there during night is a completely different thing. And the biggest thing is I really wanted this story to be a cool showcasing for some really unique monster ideas that I wanted to come up with. I haven't really thought of any yet because this story, along with all my other stories, I just want to work on it on its own. So I'm just going to focus on one comic at a time, basically. But when I get to this one, I really want to have fun with playing with different monster ideas and see what my general formula is for going with it. The next one is actually the Outcasts of Fraser Academy. Fraser Academy is the academy that the young Mackies were going to go to, and this is actually the story that I sort of took out of the Young Mackies and made it its own. Back when I mentioned that it was kind of two stories, and I took out the boarding school section, this is the boarding school section. For now, what I have for it is this kid comes to the school, and he notices that like there aren't really bullies anywhere, but there's cliques, and the cliques are strict. Like it's almost cult-like. Like he's got such a culture shock to what's going on around him. And he's trying to get down to the bottom of what is actually going on with these cliques. I thought that this would be a very fun mystery story because he notices that every single clique is led by one kid, and that kid literally acts like a king over everybody in that group, and he's like, there's something up with all of them. Our next story after that is, I'm calling it Love, but its official title is just a heart, like a heart symbol, because eventually I want to make a lineup of silent comics, and I want to go so far as to not having any words if possible. So instead of having my name at the bottom of the comic, I'm just going to have my signature, my sandcastle insignia. And it's not the most original story, but it's a story about a young couple. They're going out on a trip, which actually is their proposal trip, but they are out there, they get lost at their location, end up in someone's yard, and it's a crazy old guy. One thing leads to another. The girl thinks that the guy died. The guy that they walk onto his property, he shoots him in his gut, and she's trying to like carry him along and get him back to the tour guide, but along the way they trip into a waterfall and he's hanging off the cliff, and so he just lets himself go, and she thinks that he's dead because when they go back they don't find a body, but he actually survived, and he was taken in by some people who had a little cabin down by the creek on the bottom of the waterfall. And the whole story is like, you see her trying her best to move on with her life, and you see him trying his best to get back to her and let her know, hey, I'm not dead. Because there's a lot of moments in the story where you see that he's just not able to communicate to her, you know? When he sends letters, he sees that she's changed her address, sees that she's changed her phone number, he can't get in contact with her parents or anything like that, or his parents. Again, the story itself is a bit messy. I came up with it a very long time ago, back when I didn't really know how to make stories, but I want to create a silent comic so bad. If I can redo the plot to be something a little bit better, I definitely will, but for now, that's what the plot is for Love or Heart, whatever. Next, we got Parker Street Punks. This one is different. This is actually going to be a line of comic strips that I want to make. It stars 4 friends, and I wanted to make little comic snippets of just them in different situations. I believe the friends are Toby Jones, Isaac Kavanaugh, RJ Hansen, and Quentin Wilhelm. I actually came up with them a very long time ago, and I've still had the idea since, and I definitely want to go forward and make a line of comic strips out of those guys, just little ones. In fact, I want to put those on webtoons. I want those to be like a webtoon exclusive, and then eventually when I have enough of them, I want to print a book that has like a whole compilation of them. Whew, that's a lot of stories so far. There's 2 stories left. Next one is Hail the Red Storm. This one is my apocalypse story. Since Nox is no longer really an apocalypse story, it's more of an alien fantasy story. Hail the Red Storm is an idea of, I wanted to create an apocalypse, and I tried to think of what the apocalypse could be. I went and talked to Adam, and I tried to consult with him different ideas for an apocalypse, and I wanted to do something original, like something that could be apocalyptic but has never really been seen before. And I came up with the idea that the world would be caught in a constant storm. It's constantly raining and thundering outside, if not that, snowing. And actually, it turns out that the storm is carrying an alien race, which are killing people in droves. And it's all about a kid named Eric Fitzgerald, who is trying to show his potential, because before this, you see that he's kind of in a state, because he's a young kid, and he doesn't get a lot of respect from people. Not a lot of people respect him at school. His parents don't give him enough trust or anything like that. At his job, he doesn't get the respect he deserves. But he sees that in this world where it's just pure survival, he's actually really good at it. Something kind of like The Walking Dead. You see that with a lot of characters where they really shine through in the fallout. And with the storm going on, they actually hear about a safe zone. It's an underground bunker that actually has hydro-powered electricity. So it literally takes the water from the storm, from the rain, and uses that to power it up. So they essentially have unlimited power. And they're trying to get to this safe zone. And they're like, it would be nice if we could bring them a supply that would kind of be our ticket in. And they end up finding a whole boatload of greenhouse seeds. And growing in this world is something that needs to be done, because there's no sun anymore and you can't grow grow vegetables or crops anymore. So they find all of these seeds, and that's the big thing, and they want to take that to the safe zone and use that as their ticket in. But along the way, a small group sees their seeds and they're like, we want those seeds, like we'll trade you for them. And they're like, no, like we need these seeds. And they're like, we're taking them to a safe zone. And they're like, that safe zone is bullshit, give us the seeds. And then they end up fighting that group, and Eric gets kidnapped, and he's stuck with this group for a long time. But he finally kills this group and escapes, and he tries to get back to this safe zone to see if his group actually made it there. And along the way, he runs into a kid that goes by Opie. Is it Opie or Obi? I think it's Obi. And along the way, you just kind of see Eric and Obi trying to find themselves in this new world and try and make something of themselves and survive together. It's a very nice story. I'm really excited for that one. And plus, I think that is such a cool concept for an apocalypse. And by the way, something that Adam gave me the idea for was, by the way, in my comic canon, because I would like all these stories to be in the same universe, this is going to be like far into the future, like a couple hundred years from now. Like it's pretty far out, or at least it's definitely not current day. But Adam came up with the idea that, because you know how the Great Red Spot on Jupiter is a storm, it's an anticyclonic storm. He came up with the idea that the storm would actually be the Great Red Spot. So that's where I came up with the name Hail the Red Storm. So like, it's all storming around Earth, like it's a constant storm, but the biggest part of it, which actually turns out to be something that I can't really reveal right now, but it's a big reveal in the story, the most intense storm is this deep red cloud, like this glowing red cloud, causing hurricanes and downpouring and all that. Very, very cool, and I'm very excited for this story. And the last story of my comic lineup so far is one that is very important to me, and that's why I wanted to save it for last. It's called Terranax, and I've talked about it a little bit actually on my Zeke channel, if you guys have heard about it there. But Terranax is my recreation of my entire life story. I wanted to recreate a story about my life, and in fact there's actually a good story with this. I was gonna just make the story of my life at one point, but I just thought to myself, like, my life wasn't exciting enough for a story like that. Like, I don't feel like it'd be that good. And I was talking to Haley about that, and she was like, well, then just write the best parts, write the good parts. That's not a bad idea. But again, I had that thought in my head of like, but there weren't that many, you know? My life just wasn't that exciting as a child, or at least that's what I thought. And I knew that I always wanted to recreate myself as this big, epic action character. In fact, as a kid I did it and I called him Kartanzik, which is an incredible name. And I even talked about Kartanzik a little bit in my very first video on this channel. I came up with a fantastic idea as I was pondering this idea in my head. What if I do write my life story, but instead of doing just me, I do make that epic action character. I make Kartanzik, and it's all about Kartanzik going on all of these adventures that are reflective of big moments in my life. But then I came up with an even better idea. What if that was the story? What if the story wasn't the epic action character? The story was about this kid trying to write this epic action character. So the story of Terranax, which is going to be a very long series, it's going to be multiple issues. In fact, every single edition of Terranax isn't even going to be a graphic novel, like a thick story. It's going to be a smaller story, divided up along a huge period of time. I hit this really nice point in developing the whole story, and there's a lot of personal stuff that I don't know if I'll get into just yet, but I came up with the idea that the whole story would be about self-acceptance, where it starts off as you just see this innocent kid trying to make this epic action story based off of his own life. That's how it starts, you know? He's got such a whimsical view on life because as he's living it, he's thinking about how Terranax lives it. To clarify the name, the character's name that is based off of me, his name is Tanner Reed. And so how I came up with Kartanzik, this kid came up with Terranax. But you have little young Tanner, who's like a toddler to a little kid at this point, living through his entire life thinking like, I'm Cartonzic, like this is my life. My life is this epic action adventure. And then, later on, when he gets just a little bit older, he starts to recognize that there's some stuff that he needs to face, some obstacles and challenges that he needs to face in his own life that he's not ready for. And so he starts to actually use Terranax as a source of confidence and bravery. Once he has his first run-in with a kid where it's kind of a fight, I'll just say it here, I've never actually been in a fight. It was like barely ever a fight, and it's the same for Terranax, and I'm not gonna lie about it. But Tanner, dealing with these real-life things of bullies and all that, he asks himself, what would Terranax do? And so Terranax is no longer really how he views his life, it's more become what he tries to be. And so Terranax kind of gets this unhealthy place in Tanner's mind of that being his only source of self-esteem. And he starts to try and think of himself as Terranax when he's going through situations. And then later on in his life, when he gets older and he has to take on more responsibilities, he hits a state of finally it all dawning on him that he's not Terranax, and he's never going to be. And because of how he viewed Terranax growing up, Terranax became the perfect character. He became like a god, almost. And because he can never live up to Terranax, he starts to feel like his life isn't important, and he doesn't have that much meaning to it, until eventually he hits a point where he realizes that he's been looking at everything all wrong. He used to think that he was a failure because he couldn't live up to Terranax. But soon, from the help of the people around him, his loved ones, his friends, he's not failing because he can't be Terranax. He's failing because he's trying to be. This story is a very important story to me, and I really want to make sure that it gets the care that it deserves and that it's made well. And like I said, it's going to take a very, very long time to make the entire story. But Terranax is by far the most important story that I'm ever going to make. Like, I hope that it's the highlight of my stories, other than the animation. But Terranax is something that will always mean a lot to me. Obviously because it's about me. But other than the soft, sappy, emotional crap that we just went through there, and I do want to talk about the story a lot, one cool thing that I want to do with it is because you will see this young artist, Tanner, creating Terranax. And so every single story, you're going to see a cool division between Tanner living his real life and then him recreating it as Terranax. In fact, there are 3 ways that I wanted Tanner to actually showcase Terranax throughout the story. The way that I wanted to do it was you would see it in 3 different ways. Either Tanner would experience a real life event and then you would see it later rewritten as a Terranax story, or you would see him approaching a situation. The situation hasn't occurred yet, and he's picturing it as Terranax. So, like, he's going to a slip and slide, and he wants to see it as Terranax, like, flowing through these, like, roaring rapids through the jungle or something like that. Or you're seeing Tanner use his own story ideas and then writing Terranax into them. So it's kind of like you see Terranax become the aftermath of an event, he's occurring during the event, or he comes before anything else, as you see him grow up from a toddler to a grown adult. And I am more than excited to make Terranax an actual thing. Okay, we're good there. Woo! So now we're going to start looking at all the concepts that I have for comics. They're not ideas that I have really decided to move forward on. They're ones that I've considered, though, that I think have some potential, but I really need to sit down and think them through and think if they can go anywhere. So, like, if you'll look through this list, you'll have Ruin, which was the first ever comic that I was going to make, like, official comic, and I scrapped the idea because it was unoriginal, poor writing, I didn't know what I was doing at the time, and that's okay. It was a learning curve for me. It gave me some ideas on how to actually approach story making, but I didn't really know what I was doing, and you could kind of tell through just the ideas that came through in the story. It was very derivative of other ones that I find very important to myself. So I decided to get rid of it. Alter is another one that, again, it's based off of a lot of stories that I've already seen. It's nothing near original, but it's about a young journalist named Caleb Stiller who's in the middle of Utah, and he's trying to check out this town that its documentation and records stop by the 80s, but you can still find this town, so he's trying to figure out what's going on. Something sort of akin to Outlast 2 or Silent Hill, things like that. Everyday Shadows is actually a really cool idea. It's all about the part of you that is like not your worst flaw, but let's call it your evil temptation. Trying to bring out a side of you that you know isn't a good thing to bring out, but the desire is there. So I'll just read through the description for you. A young man named Jamie Sokolsky goes with his friend Tyrese Wilson to a random cave in the ground leading to a pool. After Jamie accidentally pushes Tyrese in, Tyrese comes out furious, to the point of leaving town because he doesn't want to see Jamie again. After Jamie checks back to the hole, he discovers something odd. The pool recreates you, exactly. But this version of you partakes in every dark desire you wish to suppress. That's what Everyday Shadows is about. And I think it's a really cool idea. I don't know if it has enough to be a full story just yet, or at least it hasn't really taken priority in my head at all, but eventually at some point in the future I would like to come back to it. Natural is actually the first ever apocalypse story I was going to make. It's Hail the Red Storm, but not as creative and not as well made. It's about a guy named Josh Denton. Josh Denton, come on, Carter, goes by Dean, and he's discovering that he doesn't really fit in modern society that well. And when the apocalypse comes, he sees that he's really cut out for this. He's cut out for the survivalism and the cutthroat nature of it all. Petals is a very nice one that I really like. Petals is one that I really want to make, but it's such a touchy subject that I don't know if it would be completely appropriate, at least not until I gained more insight into the topic of the story. But Petals is all about a guy named Tucker who really gains affection for this girl named April. But April is kind of infamous around town because a lot of assholes around town will say like, oh, she just blue balls guys and she's lame and blah blah blah, stuff like that. But Tucker ignores that and he wants to go on a date with her, and they have a fantastic time and they start to actually build a relationship. But he soon discovers what everybody was talking about, and she refuses to be intimate with anybody because of some past trauma. But Tucker feels like there's just too much that he would be losing if he left her for this reason, and also he doesn't feel like that's the right way to approach it, so he tries to push through and find a way to make their relationship work, and that's what I wanted the story to be. And the reason that I called it Petals was, like, I thought of it as like the rose that represents love is kind of withering away, and you see a fray in the entire idea. That one is very nice to me, and I like the idea of making some comics that aren't big fantasy sci-fi action epics, you know what I mean? I want to branch out with different ideas and concepts, genres. I want to have as broad and diverse of a lineup as possible, and I think that this would be a beautiful story. Now again, I don't know if it would be completely appropriate because that's a very touchy subject, one that I unfortunately don't know much about, but I would really like to see that in a story. So I'm considering it. Saving Greenville is very interesting because if you guys remember a while back, I talked about how eventually in the future I want to make a video creating my own interpretation of the Greek gods as teenagers in this society, and Saving Greenville is actually all about those kids, the kids that would be based off of the Greek gods, where you have like the whole gods versus titans dynamic. That's a big truck. And this is actually the plot of it. So Bruce, Tina, and Fester, based off of Zeus, Athena, and Hephaestus, are a group of rebellious teens that recruit some new friends, wishing to uncover the dark secrets of the people running their hometown. Oh, and by the way, Pandora's box, I really wanted to play off of that idea in the story, where you have like a young girl who has this backpack that she carries everywhere, and it turns out to have some very, very dark stuff from her parents, and they would be connected into all the dark stuff happening in Greenville. I really, really want to make that, and if I can make it work, I'm definitely going to make it work. We have 2 more for my concept ideas. This one here, I haven't come up with a name for it yet, but this one actually came from my desire to create a story all about the uprising of a villain, sort of akin to Breaking Bad or The Walking Dead, where you follow the main character, and while you still want to stick with them through their journey, they are becoming worse and worse people as it goes on. This one is not the most original idea because it's all about a relationship, but Finn Ramsey, who was orphaned at a young age, meets the lovely Delaney Walter. They totally hit it off until Finn starts to become very uneasy and suspicious with her family, especially her father, Jet. And I wanted that to be a story where you see that Finn is not on the right side of the situation, but because you've been following him throughout it, you get that conflict of like, I really want to side with this guy, but I know it's not right to. I love stories like that. The Walking Dead and Breaking Bad are some of my favorite stories throughout my life, and I don't think that's a coincidence. This one here, I have a note with this one. Again, it doesn't have a title, and I don't really even have an idea for the plot yet, but I'm just going to read you what the note says. I do not have a thought of plot just yet for this idea. Just a concept for a story. I've always wanted to do a story where all the characters are the same family during a reunion. I've seen a lot of stories where I felt like the amount of characters is a bit unnecessary. Even so, sometimes I've asked, why is this character here? But if it's a family, it makes sense why that character's there. So I thought it would be a big story revolving around one family, and that it would be a very fun comic to make. Those are all of my concept ones so far. Ones that I've considered, ones that I am considering going forward with. And the final thing that I want to talk about today is the animation. So I talked a lot about this in my video titled Talking About My Animation Project, but that was more giving the history and the pretext to the entire situation of me creating the animation. Here I really do want to talk about the plot. So this is another world. It's a world that is not Earth. I'm starting to notice a pattern here. But it's a world called Amerik. And Amerik is all about highly powered and enhanced beings that live on the planet. In fact, there are 11 pillars of this world, or pillars as I call them, and they are all different categories of power. You have stuff like mind, the elements, the arts, spirit. Above this world are the mentors. The mentors are people that have gained a state of supremely advanced power and immortality, actually, and they sort of hold domain over the planet itself, not over the people. That's very important, and they try to keep it at bay. So, for example, the Mentor of Elements, he'll try to stop earthquakes from happening, or floods. The Mentor of Health will try to stop plagues from spreading, different things like that. And within the mentors, there was the Mentor of Illusion, named Sendrin. Sendrin was a very arrogant mentor, not a good mentor at all. In fact, one day, he managed to convince everyone that had illusion-based powers, if they didn't follow him like a god, that they would be punished after death for all eternity. Every one of them kind of created a cult based around Sendrin, the Mentor of Illusion, and he just did it as a practical joke. He just thought it was funny, and the other mentors were disgusted by it, and conflicts were building and arising throughout the mentors to the point where an all-out war broke out between them. Every mentor went up against Sendrin and Talia, the Mentor of Spirit. They sort of took the same side because they both have a bad history with the other mentors. And eventually, they banish Sendrin. They don't kill him because he still needs to be around to keep the Todrick to do its job. If you guys don't know, the Todrick is a relic that sort of holds all of the power for a mentor. It's kind of like a battery. If you have a screw gun, the screw gun is the one that's putting the screw into the wall, but it can only do it through this battery. You know, the battery is the one doing a lot of the work, or at least it's providing the capability of doing that work. And the Todrick kind of acts like that. So keeping him alive still keeps the role of the Mentor of Illusion around, while keeping him out of Serenmos where he can do harm to the people down below. But as members of the illusion-based cult start to show themselves again because they went into hiding many years ago. They're starting to make their presence known again. And our main characters, a small group, are trying to get to the bottom of what they're doing, and they're trying to stop this group of illusion power users, and they're also trying to stop an entire plot to bring Sendrin back to his throne. And that is the animation idea, and it's going to have so many things of unique world building, and you'll see so many different powers being utilized, and so many different creative ideas for magic and superpowers and all that. And I'm very, very excited for that story. That story, again, I said it in the video talking about the animation project, it's going to take years because I don't even know how to animate, and from the way it looks, I'm going to be the only one animating it. So it's going to take so long for me to pull it off, but it'll absolutely be worth it in the end. And so will every other story that I've talked about in this video. Every single story that we are gonna cover and that I am hopefully gonna release to you guys as an official graphic novel, I really think that it'll be worth it. This was a fantastic video, guys. Thank you so much for watching this. This was Carter Sandvin with Sandbox Illustration. Make sure to check in the description for links to more of my content. Make sure to like the video, comment on it, and subscribe for weekly art-related videos. Anyways, have fun, dudes.